Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Le Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Le Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Egypt for talks on a Gaza ceasefire after saying Israel had accepted a Washington-backed deal and urged Hamas to do the same. A month after withdrawing from the presidential race, Joe Biden takes center stage at the Democratic National Convention, urging voters to elect Kamala Harris to preserve democracy. And divers launch fresh search for 6 people, including UK tech tycoon Mike Lynch and the chairman of Morgan Stanley International, after a luxury yacht capsized off the Italian island of Sicily. In India, Supreme Court orders setting up a national task force to ensure safety of doctors at the workplace, days after the rape and murder of a doctor in the city of Kolkata. And gold prices hit an all-time high, trading over $2,500 per ounce, making gold bars worth over $1 million for the first time ever. Hello and welcome. We begin with the big focus on Kenya. The East African nation is once again on the brink of chaos and mayhem. Tensions are simmering in Kenya once again as the William Ruto government plans to reinstate some of the scrapped controversial taxes. In a television interview, Kenya's Finance Minister John Mbadi said the government is considering reinstating about 49 tax measures. These include the reintroduction of an eco-levy, which will increase prices of electronic items, diapers and other goods. The finance minister insisted that unlike the initial proposal, this one will exclude sanitary pads. The government says the measure is aimed at reducing waste. More importantly, it says bringing back the scrap tax measures will help the debt-ridden Kenyan government raise about $1.2 billion. The government says these measures were needed to pay for expenditure, including wages for teachers. The government also aims to collect more taxes by extending the tax amnesty period by 6 months. Now, after the announcement, protest groups in Kenya say they are ready to hit the streets again. In June, deadly protests and violence plunged Kenya into anarchy. Protesters even stormed into the country's parliament. At least 50 people were killed and thousands were injured in the countrywide protests. These protests forced William Ruto to abandon the finance bill that proposed new taxes and hikes to raise over $2 billion. Bowing to pressure, the president was even forced to dismiss most of the cabinet. The protesters said the proposed tax hikes would pile on pressure on the citizens who are already struggling with skyrocketing cost of living. The Kenyan government is stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand is the competing demands of the citizens to reduce the financial burden. On the other are lenders such as the International Monetary Fund, who are urging Kenyan government to cut deficits to obtain more financing. After scrapping the contentious finance bill, the Ruto government reassessed the budget to explore alternative revenue sources. It cut government spending, but the fiscal deficit widened further. Global ratings agencies such as Moody's and Fitch downgraded Kenya's rating over concerns about the government's ability to service its debt. Kenya's public debt ratio almost doubled from 41% of the GDP in 2014 to a projected 78% of GDP in 2024. The government says its hands are tied as the country struggles to repay its huge debt burden. Kenya's domestic and foreign debt was a staggering $80 billion last year. So President William Ruto and his cabinet are at a fork in the road, and any decision they make is likely to have direct implications on the economy and peace in Kenya. Now, for more on this, we have with us Stella Agara, governance and security analyst and a tax justice activist. She joins us live from Nairobi. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what led to President Ruto's decision to reintroduce the scrap tax measures? What alternatives were considered before deciding to bring back these tax measures?
I think one of the realizations that we are coming to right now is that the president did not understand the seriousness of the protests that we had in Kenya recently. He has not internalized the plight of Kenyans, and he has not internalized the issues that Kenyans are facing. He still insists on taxing a population that does not have the capacity to pay more than it's already paying. As we speak now, he has now appointed a government that is calling a government of national unity, a government that has included some representatives from the opposition, including the person who's currently sitting on the seat of the cabinet secretary for treasury. Unfortunately, he has not come with any creative ideas. He has not come with anything new, and he's reverting back to the policies that was scrapped. This gentleman was in parliament and he voted against the finance bill. So one of the questions Kenyans are asking themselves is what has now changed because he's now sitting in that seat in treasury to begin with. Was he just playing politics when he was in parliament? Was he just playing to the gallery when he was in parliament? We also know that the president thinks that at this point he has consolidated power so he can practically, dismiss Gen Z and show them that there's nothing they can do in this country. But that's going to be one very big mistake by this government and by the president, because I don't think he understands the agency around which Kenyans have decided they will suffer no more.
And Stella, exploring the potential effects on businesses, households and government revenue, how will these reinstated taxes impact the Kenyan economy and, of course, its citizens?
I think, first of all, for example, if you talk about the glaring eco-levy tax, it targets imported goods, it targets goods coming from sources that are outside of the Kenyan market. One of the issues that the government should have considered when making this decision is the fact that Kenya depends heavily on imports, an error that exists because of the policies that have been made over time by the government that did not allow industry to thrive and eventually caused Kenya to be heavily dependent on imports. So if you impose an eco-levy tax on everything that is coming from outside the country, you're basically saying that this tax is still going to be transferred to the citizens. The Kenyan population is also a huge consumer economy, and so they're going to be buying heavily from the things that are coming from foreign markets, and then these are going to be subjected to tax. The sanitary towels were one area, and if you remove the sanitary towels, there are many other essential goods that we import and use as a country that are going to have this eco-levy imposed upon them, which still means that the burden is still coming back to the Kenyan. Unfortunately, this is happening at a time when more corruption cases have been exposed in this government. There's a gentleman called Morara Kebaso who single-handedly been showing us some of the projects that the government has been neglecting or has claimed to have invested resources in that have not been completed. Where has that money gone to? How can that money be recovered and be invested into the economy before they come back into the pockets of Kenyan citizens? The state has also decided to be very irresponsible about how they care for the lowest people in our society. And so these taxes are going to be imposed to that consumer, to the person who needs these goods the most. Unfortunately, this is not going to work for our economy.
Right. And Stella, what steps will the government take to address the public concerns and also the potential protests, considering the previous outcry and those devastating protests in June?
One of the steps that they must take is engaging in public participation, and there were some of the petitions that were in court and litigation that was in court just before the rejection of the finance bill were about the procedure that was used to even bring the finance bill to parliament. In the Constitution of Kenya and the laws of Kenya require that there be public participation. That they consider input from the citizens, and if they reject or ignore any of the input from the citizens, then they are required to explain why they have rejected some of the input from the citizens. Unfortunately, the process previously had not met this threshold. If they are going to embark on this process, then they will be required to ensure that the process is above par. The second is that they will have to contend with the fact that the same citizens they are going to are the ones who say they do not want this finance bill. They have been unequivocal about the fact that they will not listen to any conversation about the finance bill. And so they'll also need to do a bit of convincing and persuasion to convince Kenyans that this is what makes sense, alongside convincing them that these are the only measures, aside from the issues of corruption that have been seen in the country. The last thing that I guess they would have to do is to seriously pay attention to the voices of Kenyans and ensure that then they're also monitoring what other arms of government are doing. Today, the Supreme Court of Kenya has suspended the ban on some of those taxes, which means the government can continue taxing even as they wait for the process in court to be completed. Kenyans are not happy about this. If you check some of their feedback already, they're very unhappy about this. They're very unhappy about the conduct of the courts concerning this. This is fueling a lot of negative energy amongst the citizens in a country that is already in a very volatile state. And so they'll have to exercise a lot of precaution to ensure that they maintain the fabric of our nation, even as they embark on this process of trying to get taxes. But then they'll also have to engage in a final assignment of ensuring that then we reconsider completely our borrowings. We reconsider what we are spending on. If we do not have sufficient resources to feed Kenyans, we should not be the ones who are planning for all kinds of huge constructions, cement towers that eventually may not necessarily benefit Kenyans who do not have the resources to use them at the end of the day.
Right. Stella, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued insights on all the latest coming out of Kenya.
Thank you for having me.
Shifting focus to Sudan, talks to restore peace in the war-torn nation are underway in Geneva without the presence of the Sudanese army. But the warring party has agreed to send a delegation to Egypt for peace talks. Sudan's army-backed government announced on Sunday that it will send a delegation to Cairo for talks on implementing the Jeddah Agreement. The agreement was signed in May last year by the mediators, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan's warring sides, the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. The two sides have been fighting a bloody civil war since April last year. The Jeddah deal mandated the RSF to leave civilian areas. However, the RSF has continued its attacks and has occupied more areas. A fresh effort for brokering peace between the two sides began last week in Geneva and is expected to last until this week. The US-led peace talks are co-hosted by Saudi Arabia and Switzerland. Delegation from the UAE, Egypt, African Union, and the United Nations are also attending the talks. Among the warring parties, only the RSF is present in Geneva. The army rejected the invitation for the talks, citing the disobedience of the Jeddah deal by the RSF. The army also condemned the presence of the UAE in the talks, which it accuses of supporting the RSF. Now, the UAE denies the accusations. Without the presence of Sudan's army, a ceasefire is highly unlikely through the Geneva meet. As per the US envoy, progress has been made trying to increase access to humanitarian aid, including an agreement by the RSF to open a road and a border crossing, with 100 trucks ready to begin deliveries. But issues still have to be sorted out before the implementation.
We all believe much more needs to be done in terms of humanitarian aid and aid access. As I said, one of our top priorities this week is to get these 3 different arteries open, the Daba Road, the Sennar Axis, and Adre, particularly with the roads, the rainy season having closed off other access through, say, the south or through Tine.
The civil war in Sudan has resulted in one of the world's worst humanitarian tragedies. As per the UN, the country is now at breaking point, with growing number of people without food, water and shelter. More than 16,000 people have lost their lives, and over 10 million people are now internally displaced. Shifting focus to Nigeria, the Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has travelled to France on a jet that was seized by a French court for a Chinese firm just days ago. As per reports, Tinubu flew to France on Monday on the newly acquired presidential Airbus A330, which was among the 3 seized Nigerian aircraft by the French Judicial Court. The jets were confiscated last week amid an ongoing legal battle between a Chinese company and the Nigerian government. The firm in question is the Zhongshan Fusheng Industrial Investment Company Limited, which signed a contract in 2007 with Nigeria's Ogun State to develop a free trade zone. However, Nigerian officials terminated the contract in 2015, citing failure by the company to fulfill the agreement. But the Chinese company has been demanding restitution. It has already secured more than $60 million in an arbitration award in London and secured 2 French court orders to seize Nigerian assets earlier this year. France seized 3 Nigerian aircraft last week that were on routine maintenance in the country. And these were newly acquired Airbus A330s valued at over $100 million. A Dassault Falcon 7X and a Boeing 737 were previously part of the Nigerian presidential fleet. However, on Friday, Zhongshan released the presidential Airbus as a gesture of goodwill, which Tinubu is now reportedly flying on. Tinubu's spokesperson has described the trip as a brief work stay in France without specifying the aircraft. After the confiscation of the assets, Nigeria issued a strong statement accusing the Chinese firm of using unorthodox means to take over assets. It also accused the firm for misleading courts in the UK, the US and France to claim Nigerian assets. Nigeria has now begun a legal and diplomatic recourse to reclaim its sovereign assets. It says the dispute is related to the Ogun state government, while the Chinese firm is targeting the Nigerian federal government and its assets that are covered by sovereign immunity and can be legally seized by foreign courts. Meanwhile, Zhongshan has refuted the claims that its project in the Nigerian state was not up to the mark. It said the Ogun Free Trade Zone was featured as a significant international investment and that the company hopes to reach a reasonable compromise settlement rapidly with Nigeria. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the coups and the crises, there are many positive stories from Africa that often get overlooked, but not on this show. Isabelle Sambo is a name that resonates with strength and determination in Senegal. A 2-time Olympian and 9-time African wrestling champion, Sambo defied the odds in a sport dominated by men. After competing on the world stage, she has returned to her village in southern Senegal, dedicating her time to training the next generation of female wrestlers. Our next report gets you all the details.
In the quiet village of Malombe in southern Senegal, Isabelle Sambou, a wrestling legend, returns to her roots. At 43, she's a 2-time Olympian and 9-time African wrestling champion. Her journey took her from the rural corners of Senegal to the grand stages of the Olympics in London and Rio. And now she's back home not to rest, but to pass on her legacy. Sambu's story is one of resilience and determination. In a country where wrestling is revered but often male-dominated, she broke barriers. Sambu became a trailblazer. And even though she faced ridicule, she never wavered.
When you do women's wrestling, you will have a lot of people who make fun of you. I lived through that when I went to Resurgent to wrestle. When I wore my shorts, there were people who made fun of me. There were others who said, "Is this a woman or a boy?"
Now Sambu dedicates her life to coaching the next generation of female wrestlers in her village. She didn't bring home an Olympic medal, but that hasn't dampened her spirit. Instead, it fuels her desire to see one of her trainees achieve what she could not. She dreams of discovering the future Isabels, those who will rise and perhaps surpass her legacy.
After I stopped wrestling professionally, until now I don't have work. I'm also not married yet. Well, that's how it is. It's just that when I stopped, I came back here to my village. I told myself that I need to find my roots again, in order to find the future Isabels, the future champions, those who will do maybe more than Isabel. Because it was my dream to bring a medal to Senegal.
On the sandy grounds of Malomp, Sambu trains young girls, instilling in them the same grit that carried her through her own journey. Among them is 18-year-old Mame Marie Sambu, who, inspired by Isabel, decided to take up wrestling despite societal pressures.
She was a wrestler, and I saw her and said, well, I'm going to be like her. When I started to wrestle, people said that they've never seen a girl wrestle. But I never listened to them, because if I did, I would never have found myself here where I am.
Sambu wants to use her fame to encourage young girls in Senegal to follow her trailblazing path and reach their potential. Some even hope increasing female participation in a sport so ingrained in Senegalese culture could help address larger issues of gender equality, including access to education, economic opportunities, and child marriage. Hence, her life is a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of staying true to one's roots. Through her, a new generation of champions is rising, fiercely protecting their village traditions while daring to dream big. In a place where the past meets the future, Sambu's legacy lives on, stronger than ever.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hello and welcome to Fast and Factual on Firstpost, where we get you the top 50 stories from around the world. I'm Alyson Le Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. Let's take a look at our top stories. Now, the Israeli Defense Forces have retrieved the bodies of 6 hostages from the Gaza Strip. The bodies were found in the Khan Yunis area. The IDF carried out the recovery operation with the security agency Shin Bet. 5 of the hostages had been previously declared dead. According to Israel, there are 105 hostages remaining in Gaza, with 71 of them still alive. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to a Gaza ceasefire deal. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed the green signal by the Israeli leader. Blinken also called on Hamas to agree to the deal. Talks between Blinken and Netanyahu in Tel Aviv were described as positive by both sides. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris made a surprise appearance on the first day of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Harris was welcomed with thunderous applause and cheers from the crowd. Harris praised the current U.S. President Joe Biden in her speech at the Democratic National Convention. Harris hailed Biden for his historic leadership. Kamala Harris will formally accept the Democratic Party's endorsement for the 2024 presidential race at the convention. U.S. President Joe Biden